Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
President Trump holds firm on his promise to keep the government closed and on his criticism of the Fed in relation to rising interest rates. The U.S. has sold weapons to Saudi Arabia that were used to help kill at least 4,600 civilians in Yemen, according to an independent monitoring group. So we're going to look at both of those, but you're probably wondering, well, why do you care? I mean, you know, Trump's doing his thing and we're helping kill civilians. So hopefully the Yemen one, I don't have to explain much, even if you're not big on us being involved in the Middle East. I would hope that most of our listeners to the show don't condone the U.S. directly being involved in the killing of civilians by providing the weapons that kill them. So we'll talk about that. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit, but I think you care because you should be interested if we as a nation are being associated with the murder of civilians. Further, the President Trump note. Well, why do you care about the, firm promise to keep the government closed and on his Fed criticism? Well, it is a partial shutdown, so we're going to make sure that you understand kind of what's affected by this and what's not, and talk about if this is a good strategy by the president. What's the end goal here? And then also the Fed criticism. Why or why not? Again, this is a good strategy. There can be some serious market implications here. And in fact, there may have already been. So that again affects all of us. Some of us more directly who are in the stock market, but for those who are not, it affects you in the trickle down ways of companies that you either work for or companies that are invested in other companies that are part of struggles on the market. So there's a lot of different ways you could care, a lot of different angles, but the point is both of these, I think, apply widely to everybody, some in different ways, but the Yemen thing just across the board of if you're an American, you should be interested in if we're engaging in helping people kill civilians. So we'll talk about all that, but of course we can't begin a conversation on these important topics without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, Merry Christmas to you too.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
I know.
Government shut down, Trump doing his thing and talking about the U.S. sending weapons to people who end up using them against civilians, I guess. Okay, time to get back to the real world. Christmas is over.
That's right. Looks like you and I aren't allowed to take a few days off because
peace on earth and
we go
goodwill
away
toward men seems to be gone.
Boom.
I'm ready though. Okay.
Government's shut down and people are dying. So
all right.
Anyway, let's start, Lance, with the Yemen thing because I think we can get.
Okay.
I think we'll get through this one relatively quickly. It's not a lot that we don't know so far. For those who aren't as aware of what's going on in Yemen, the problem is that Saudi Arabia has been fighting the Houthi rebels there. Mm-hmm. And this is a long going thing. I mean, it started back in the 90s, Lance, I think, right, to an extent. I mean, this is kind of when the Houthi rebels came about and started this, I mean, as their name implies, they're rebels. They don't like a lot of what the Saudi regime does. And Saudi Arabia has engaged in very aggressive sanctions against them. The problem is, and airstrikes. The problem with that, of course, is that these rebels, like many rebels, are interwoven as part of the populace. So when you kill one rebel, you might inadvertently kill 5 civilians, who may not have even supported the rebels, but they die as a result of the targeting of those civilians. Mm-hmm. So you have 4,600 civilians, a little more than that, according to this independent monitoring group who watches what's happening in the war. You have that group saying that more than 4,600 civilians have died as a result of weapons that the U.S. has sold to Saudi Arabia. So we've said, here are these weapons, and Saudi Arabia turns around and says, we're dropping those bombs that you just sold us on these rebels, which in turn kills 4,600 civilians. Now, that's not the end, though, of the crisis, because, again, according to the United Nations, you have about 8 million people currently who are depending on emergency food aid, and they're projecting that to rise to 14 million in Yemen. And the vast majority of those are civilians. So you have, because of the way the economic sanctions are playing out in the Houthi controlled areas, you have, again, it's going to be up to 14 million, according to the United Nations, civilians who are on food aid programs being driven to starvation as a result of this. And like we said, it's been going on since the 90s. So obviously, I don't know what you think, Lance, but to me, it seems like this Saudi thing, their approach to dealing with the Houthi rebels is obviously not very effective, because we've been doing this now for almost 30 years and to little avail, it seems like.
But we let it go. I mean, this isn't really a President Trump or Secretary Mattis or any of those things. It's not, none of it's, this is something that's been going on through Republican and Democratic administrations, and we've let the Saudis just do that. I mean, it's almost a bigger picture discussion of our relationship with the Saudis, you know, whether you want to mention Khashoggi or not, you know, how do we deal with these important allies in the Middle East? And I say important not only for their oil, but for the quote peace process, you know, because we talk about so many times with the Saudis, we are right now, they're really getting down on, we as a nation are down on the Saudis. But when you look at our other options of people to talk to, they are more of the middle of the road over there. So how many other things have we turned our head on? You know, not that I'm saying I'm in support of the president with what, you know, the Saudis did in light of Mr. Khashoggi, but at the same time, that argument of the ends justifying the means.
Right.
Is peace better? Are we having more peaceful days or hours in the Middle East because of these quote horrible things that are going on? I don't know.
So let's just real quick on the Yemen thing before we move off this. Because you're right, it opens the door to a much larger conversation.
But I'm saying, I mean, so if it's been going on since the 90s, I mean, we've got President Clinton, Bush, Obama. You know, this isn't just something that's
right.
I mean,
it's not like a Trump specific thing.
It's not a Trump thing. This is falling in his lap, and it's like, okay, but we've done that before. I mean, we ended up having to take out, oh gosh, I just drew the blank. Saddam Hussein.
Right.
You know, we supported Iraq because they were fighting Iran, and Saddam Hussein used the weapons that we gave him to wipe out the Kurds, who are still our allies that we're leaving hanging again because we're leaving Syria, but that's another. I mean, you can really can really get bogged down in this circle of who we support and then turns against us. So
I think the Saudi thing, I mean,
death is horrible.
Yeah.
But is it man, I don't know.
As long as I've been old enough to remember, we've been on, you know, quote unquote good terms most of the time. And obviously there's been lots of little hills and valleys here, but Saudi Arabia has been a regime that we support despite lots of instances over these many years where they have done things that I can't see, Lance, how they have any alignment with American values when they engage in acts like this, where the response to these rebel groups is we're going to bomb the hell out of you and then we're going to starve the civilians in the areas that you control. That doesn't seem like something that we would typically condone. So why with Saudi Arabia? Because it's not the oil argument. Remember, we just talked about this, like a month or two ago, where we said we don't get oil from Saudi Arabia anymore.
Right.
It did used to be, you know, I could get that because there was a time where obviously that was a problem. But now the whole oil situation has shifted and we export oil now. I mean, we're actively selling oil to the rest of the world because we've taken the spot as the number one oil producer. So that's not a valid argument, right? I mean, it's not an ends justify the means economically, at least not with oil. So I don't get it. Maybe you have some insight. I don't, but I don't understand.
I do. They buy other things from us.
Yeah.
They are, you know, so economically, you know, President Trump's numbers aren't correct, but they do buy things for their military. I mean, hence using weapons they bought from us that ended up killing civilians. And, the age old argument for American presidents has been, well, they at least do some of the things that we want. Do we really want to lose them to China? Do we really want to lose the Saudis to China or to Russia? Yes, they're deplorable by our standards, but when you stack them up against the other regimes in the Middle East, they're not.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
They're the good of the bad.
Yes. And so who would you rather us do business with? And we can't not do business with anybody in the Middle East because we have to have some jumping off points. We have to have some people that are working for our ideals and interests and giving us information.
So would you say you're supportive of maintaining our existing relationship with Saudi Arabia?
You asked a question.
Right.
It's not oil. What is it? I'm answering that question.
Yeah.
And there's that side. And if your ultimate goal is peace, you can't not have any allies in the region. So who's the better choice? If not the Saudis, who? And that's, I think, the dilemma that our nation has been dealing with since all the way back in the 1950s. I mean, we did it with the Shah of Iran, and then he had cancer, and then the Ayatollah took over, and they found out how many dirty deals. The Shah was horrible to his own people, but he was good to the United States, so we supported him.
Right.
For decades. That's my point. I'm like, okay, we can bash on the Saudis. And I think they've done some horrible or horrific things. But in a sense, President Trump has a point. If we don't befriend Saudi Arabia, who in the Middle East do we go to as an ally? Iran?
Yeah.
Iraq? Pakistan? Afghanistan?
Right.
The Turks?
I mean,
Azerbaijan?
our only other friend really is Israel, right? I mean, and obviously comparatively, they're better. And I'm doing that with air quotes, people, because.
But who do you go for the Arab side?
Yeah. That's the problem is you can't fall
Lebanon?
back on because of the obvious issues then with you're not allied with anybody who speaks to a large portion of the population.
Libya, Algeria, most of the other Arab folks are intimidated by the Saudis.
I wonder though, this just came to mind, a political fallout thing. Cause there's always, right. Anytime the U.S. chooses to look the other way on anything, forget whether it's Saudi Arabia or not, there are other ramifications that have nothing to do with that scenario specifically. And what I mean there is, so like take the journalist thing, right? We look the other way and we really don't punish Saudi Arabia in any significant way. It's just like, well, we just let it go. Then the question becomes, there's kind of two different things here that I'm getting at. Other countries that are developing or even who are well-established countries, they are looking to further relations with the U.S. and this gives them pause because it's like, well, the U.S. says it believes all these things, but then there's all these exceptions. And so they look at it as well, we don't condone that and we wouldn't be okay associating with somebody who does. In other words, us not condemning it means we're condoning it and somebody's not okay working with us because they're not comfortable with journalists being killed. Then you also have the other side of more deviously minded nations who say, well, if we work with the U.S., think of all the things we can get away with and still have the help of the big brother of the world. So, yes. You know what I mean? You've got those.
And if you're strong enough,
you've got those two things. If you're strong enough
that you can do us a favor, then yeah, that works. I mean, what?
If you give us enough.
I'm not saying you're wrong, intellectually and then that you're wrong morally. But if not Saudi Arabia, I just go back to this. Yeah. If not Saudi Arabia, who? And are you willing? I'm not willing. Here's an answer to your initial question. I'll finally answer it. I guess I'm okay with it unless you can come up with a better country to ally with to reach our goals in the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, really, I do default back to that. I guess what I'm saying
do
is
I
it's
like
hard
what
to-
the Saudis do? Do I think there needs to be some sort of repercussion? Yes. Do you totally just trash can them? If you don't, I'm more uncomfortable. I'll say this. I'm more uncomfortable not having any Arab allies in the Middle East than I am being allies with a regime like Saudi Arabia. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if not Saudi Arabia, then we don't have any allies in the Arab world except Israel.
The
which I'm not
alternatives are
counting
less
as-
appealing.
Right.
Yeah.
We're dealing with the best of a bad situation, and I'd rather do that than not have a lifeline to any of them.
So by that extension, you think that for the most part, President Trump is doing the best thing that he can do in this situation, which is to mainly not engage on this topic.
Yes.
Based on what you and I know. Because again,
Yes.
we say that all the time. It's, he could know all kinds of things that we don't know that would totally change our perspective on this stuff. We're subject to what we can read, what we can learn on our own.
Right.
So,
And who's to say, and I'm probably giving him more credit than he deserves, but has he made some deal with Saudi Arabia to keep an outlook on Syria?
right.
So we can bring our troops home and Saudi Arabia is going to do the dirty work.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Or,
like, hey,
or any other backroom deal.
I'll let you stay in power for what you did to, Mr. Khashoggi, but I'm going to have to pull my troops out and you're going to have to do the dirty work now.
Right.
And I won't come after you and I won't mention you on the national stage and we'll still keep our, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sorry, people. That's the way the real world works. It's not this world that we would like it to be, but there are some of those backroom deals and you can't come out publicly and say that, we're pulling our troops out of Syria because the Saudis are going in to take care of business for us because I'm going to let them stay in power because they're willing to do this dirty work and I'm bringing American troops home. You can't say that, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like that hasn't gone on. Now, maybe
That we don't know about.
My fear is that Trump isn't as smart as I am and he didn't think of that. And we are really just pulling troops out of Syria and leaving the Syrians to themselves and the Saudis are just getting away with murder.
Right. Well,
literally.
And the whole Syrian thing we've even seen now, he put the idea out there, right? And now we're going to have a very slow and strategic exit, which is different than what he initially said. Got a lot of backlash, right? So we modified the idea, which holds up with what we know about the way this particular president prefers to operate, which is use that kind of public opinion testing. And it was negative from all sides, Republicans and Democrats, saying, no, that's a really bad idea. That's bad. Cause it's the same thing that you were highlighting with Saudi Arabia. If it's not us, then who's it going to be? And in this case, in Syria, it's probably going to be Russia, and that's not great.
Not good. No,
right.
Not good.
Yeah.
I'll come out strong there. We don't do anything with Putin. Right.
Putin. That's right. If Putin's involved, it's bad news bears. Turn and run for the hills.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Or in this case, stand strong and don't back down but I'll leave everybody to think about this on the Yemen thing, and then we're going to transition out of this here. Just think about this while Lance and I give you a couple reminders. Cause I don't know the answer to this and I don't know if anybody does because I don't know if we've really tried this kind of policy approach. We are in a position though, as a world power to take a much more hardline approach, where basically there are no exceptions to to the ways that we look at the world. In other words, as opposed to the way we kind of operate right now, which is that if you give us enough, then we're going to be okay ceding, these stances. It's like with China. I mean, that's probably the largest example of all this. We always go to the Middle East, but that's in part because you wonder how worried are mainstream, editors about getting too tough on China because their own companies have, it's really sticky when you got the world's number 2 economy. There's all kinds of things that come into play. My point though is, what if we took that approach? Could that work? So we'll let you guys think about that, because my guess is a whole different show. But the deal is that the United States, it's like the whole we don't negotiate with terrorists thing, which we actually did kind of try to practice for a little while. And in some recent years, that's started to waver. But what if the world knew, whether you're China or some little tiny African country nobody's heard of, it doesn't matter who you are or what you bring to the table. The rules are the rules. And if you want to work with us, then you're going to follow them. And if you don't, then you'll find out what it's like not to work with us. I don't know. Obviously it's going to be more effective with some than others. The nations that are more heavily dependent on us, it's going to probably work better with than those who can find somebody else like a China or Russia to kind of crawl over to and say, well, we want your help because you don't like them anyway. So I don't know, something to chew on though, because I wonder if that could in the long run be more effective than we make exceptions for anybody if you provide us with the rights. If you give us enough. Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know if we can know, but maybe some of you out there have some thoughts. So at TrueChat.org, Twitter and Facebook and pretty much all social media, let us know your thoughts on that. And Lance, what's the state of us and TrueChat working on doing?
Well, TrueChat's mission, as hopefully many of our listeners know now, as we've been saying this for many months, but if you're new, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
Got it.
So we try not to rant and rave at each other. We really try to stay on course and give you some things to think about. We don't necessarily say we're right or wrong, but we try to have an educated opinion and then let you, the listener, decide which way you want to feel on an issue.
And next week, so this Friday, we've got a kind of year in review sort of show. But I think, Lance, what we're going to start with Monday, so that'll be the 31st, right?
Okay.
New Year's Eve. We'll take a look at what our goals were for this year that we set at the beginning of 2018.
Okay.
And see what we got done and what's yet to get done, and hopefully kind of lay out some of our plans for 2019. And this is an opportunity for you all to participate in helping us understand what you think we fell short on, and maybe also helping us understand the things that you liked that we did. Maybe we didn't do them as much as you wanted, but you heard something you liked and it's like, yeah, we need more of that. So this is an opportunity. Now's the time to send us all of that information as we kind of collect and get some feedback. Okay. So with that, let's move on then, Lance, to, why we care about President Trump holding firm on his promise to keep the government closed and on his Fed criticism. We can take on the government closed thing first. I mean, one is, I'll say this. I didn't realize until I started to kind of read into these stories last week that it is a partial shutdown.
Right. Okay.
And it's not so in other words, everybody's benefits is going out, because that's deemed one of those things that is okay. They passed, in other words, what happened is Congress and the president and everybody, they signed part of spending stuff earlier this month. So they partially funded everything, but then now they're hung up on basically this back half of quote unquote non-essential items. So, if you work for certain national parks, you might not be going in, certain national museums. If you're non-essential personnel in one of the 8 departments affected by this that haven't been funded yet, then you're not showing up. So like lots of people at the State Department are going home, Lance, who are non-essentials. Right. But you still have people like, the Secretary of State still shows up for work, the Chief of Staff, like, it's not like there's nobody home at the government. There's a lot of places where many thousands of people are being furloughed with the potential for no back pay. But it's not the situation where benefits don't get mailed, which is, as you and I talked about last week, I think is always the big one. That's a thing that can lose you an election, boy.
Yep.
You don't mail several million checks on time to people. That'll get people mad. So
it's a calculated risk.
Yes, it's a calculated risk. Do you think this works though for what Trump's trying to get? I mean, if he holds out, if he doesn't give in, because we had that problem with the Democrats earlier this year. Remember this? They didn't hold out. like we thought they should. And they, just kind of gave in and were like, well, I guess we'll just go along with it. We weren't really that serious. But now, I don't know. He says he's serious. You believe him? You think he's just going to hold out until the Democrats and Republicans agree to give him money for his wall?
It was quiet over Christmas.
Yeah.
And I've been busy today, so I haven't really heard what, if any, backlash there's going to be. I would think that he would settle for less if Congress will come back with less, but I'm not sure Congress is going to come back with anything. I at least over the weekend, which was the last time that I really, really stayed up on this, other than the little bit that was in the paper today, right? Are we referencing today's Wall Street Journal?
Yes. Yep.
That I'm not sure the Democrats aren't willing to wait till January 3rd when the new Congress is seated to take this up. And if that's the case, then isn't it too late for the president to do anything? Nothing ever went to him, right? Because there was never any agreement. There was a Senate bill, there was a House bill, but neither one of them, they didn't find any common ground. So nothing went to the president, correct?
Yeah, they never even passed anything because the leaders decided not to go forward. I think.
Right, because the House wanted to give the president more of what he wanted.
Yeah.
And the Senate, lo and behold, said, no, we're not going to. So there has to be some kind of agreement in Congress before it gets to the president. So is he going to sign an executive order? I mean, otherwise, I'm not sure the president has any other choice.
If it's really quote unquote the president's fault. Cause I know we're playing technicalities here, but at the end of the day, like you said, Congress never actually sent him anything. They said, well, he told us he wasn't going to do it. So we didn't do our job and send him anything. We just gave up because he said he wouldn't do it. So
I think if they send him anything, he'll sign it.
If they call his bluff and send him something that doesn't have wall funding, he'll sign it and say, I had to do it. But he's playing on right now that they're just taking me at my word that I won't sign it if they send me anything that doesn't include the funding. So he's playing the gamble there.
I think so.
That's kind of smart because
he's got to know that come January 3rd, he's not going to get any funding. So he'll take what he can and manipulate it any way a president can to get done what he wants to get done.
He told reporters yesterday, so on Christmas, quote, I can't tell you when the government is going to be open. I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall or a fence. So there you have it. That's it doesn't get a lot plainer than that. I think the Democrats' strategy, at least according to sources familiar with the Democratic leadership's plans, is at the moment that they've got the speaker stuff and the rules situation handled, which it sounds like they've mostly already got figured out, then the thinking is that Nancy Pelosi is going to move to pass the House's spending bill immediately so that they have the plausible deniability of we did our job. We did our part. If the Senate is going to hang around now, even if they don't like what we sent them, that's not our fault. They need to follow the process and do what the Constitution says, and then we can continue, so they at least get that little bit of, until the Senate maybe sends something different over, right? They get that side of, nope, we did our part.
That's the way I think it's going to play out. The president's going to end up with, if he gets any kind of funding, I think he signs it.
Yeah.
Which they're willing to give him $5 million instead of $20 million or something, or 25. I'm not sure of the numbers, but because he's
and they won't earmark it. I think the deal is they won't earmark it for the wall. They'll earmark it for additional security.
Because he's not going to get anything. He's not going to get anything.
Right. Because even though the Republicans won't say it, they think this is a bad idea.
Right.
Or most of them. I'm sure there are some of them who probably think this is a good idea, but most of them don't, which is why they refuse to say anything about it.
Like we've said for the last 2 years, the president's own departments show numbers where more people are leaving the country than coming into the country.
Yep.
Not that the border security, which I don't think should be as big an issue as it is at all, but even if it were, the numbers don't support spending this kind of money.
Right. On the wall. Because that's the other thing. If the problem is, which is what the president...
Yeah, I'm not even trying to get into the Coast Guard and all the other stuff that we've brought up time and time again.
If the drug thing is the problem,
right,
then maybe... I mean, I'm okay spending this money, Lance, if we spend it with the Coast Guard and getting them ships that aren't 50 years old. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay spending it here where, like you said, the numbers don't support that this is going to... I get the logic argument of if you build a wall, people obviously can't just stroll in. Okay, yes, except that as we have continued to talk about, the amount of people that come via land that are the problems, that are the quote unquote problems, are just so they're just so outnumbered multiple times over, nearly 5 times over by sea. So why not spend this money you're talking about? And you might get Congress to do that because you could say, look, here's the Coast Guard's effectiveness rate, right? Here's how many drugs are coming overseas. Let's spend this money on new ships for the Coast Guard. I also don't get why that doesn't work for him politically, because you can go to the base and say, I've made the military better.
Right.
I mean, who doesn't like new ships for the Coast Guard?
And we're going to spend the money wisely, and you're going to get more in return for the money we're spending.
And I have legitimate data that
supports me and backs me up.
Yeah.
Right.
That Lance and I would go along with, and that other people might go along with, because it would make sense. I don't get it.
He would get support outside of his base.
Yeah. Okay. So, last thing here, the Fed and the president's criticism. I think this one's pretty clear, or it's pretty straightforward to understand. Since President Clinton, presidents have refrained from openly criticizing the Fed as it relates to their movement on the interest rate. The thinking being that they want the public to feel like the Fed is truly independent and is not politically based and does these things as the Fed, not as Republicans or Democrats. So the fear now is that you stick by criticizing some of the president's former and current advisors have tried to get him to understand. By criticizing the chairman, you put him in a very awkward position of it. Now, if he does something, it might be looked at as a refute. If he continues to raise rates, it might be looked at as, well, I'm going against the president because I don't like him. Or if he doesn't raise rates, then it might look like he's ceding to the president's wishes. Even if neither of those things are true, now you've lost that perception that they're behaving independently.
And I believe that's Trump's lack of understanding of how the system works. I'm just trying to be transparent, telling you what I think and what that should be done. Yeah, but you're really messing things up for the future. Oh, I don't care about the future. I care about right now, because 3 days from now, I'm going to change my story and say something else.
So the last thing then, Lance, what's the other, what's the other side to this other than, because we have our very simplistic understanding of this doesn't make a lot of sense that gets you anything. What is the real other side to this?
He's thinking, why? I think President Trump is thinking, I'm the president and I'm going to try to control everything. My buddy Putin gets to. I'm sorry. That's just where I am. Mm-hmm. He sees other world leaders. He goes, boy, I wish I had that kind of power.
Well, and up until Clinton, there were presidents who did criticize the Fed.
Right. But it was
maybe not in the same way that
Trump
not
does. Openly this way, Yeah. And I'm not saying that backroom deals didn't get done and that it's never not been political before. But President Trump just throws out the status quo and says, here we go. Let's just make it. Let's see who's bigger. Let's see who's tougher. It just is different. Maybe it'll work, but it is a totally different way than what we've done in the past.
Let us know at TrueChat.org. Listen to TrueChat podcast anywhere fine podcasts are found. Apple, Stitcher, and your favorite one, Spotify. For the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Let us know your thoughts. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.